There's nothing more thrilling than being on the front edge of a storm and capturing that perfect lightning shot. I'm going to give you some tips today to help you capture yours. Hello again and welcome back to another episode of Wisconsin's Outdoor Explorer podcast. I am your host, Jason, and one of my favorite things to photograph are storms. I love the challenge of capturing that perfect lightning strike or, setting up a time lapse and seeing that them shelf clouds just come through. It's just amazing to see how the clouds move, and it's such a rewarding aspect of being able to capture nature when it's at its most powerful. And the photographer in me just loves being out there and being able to capture that powerfulness of a storm. And I've been fortunate enough to capture some pretty amazing shots of lightning. I get asked all the time about how I did it, what equipment I'm using, what settings are you using, how are you doing that? And in lieu of these recent storms that we had go through our state, I thought it'd be kind of a neat little change of pace here for the podcast to kind of share some of the things that I'm doing and some of the equipment that I have to capture these storm images. So it's going to be a little bit different podcast today that, again, I just kind of wanted to share with you some tips and some of the things that I do when I'm capturing storms. First, we're going to start with the equipment. Now, my main camera is a Nikon D7200. It's a DSLR. I used to use a bridge camera, and a bridge camera looks a lot like a DSLR, but you can't change lenses. And the problem I had with the bridge camera was you were just kind of limited on your settings. I mean, you could do some manual settings, but it wasn't enough to really do what I wanted to do with a camera. Now, I did get lucky enough to shoot some storms with the bridge camera and got some really nice lightning shots, but it was really trial and error, and it was a lot more luck than it was skill. So I knew I was ready to get more serious about photography, and I knew to do that, I had to step up my camera, and the Nikon D7200 was just a perfect fit for me. There are a lot of great cameras out there. A lot of people are using the Sony mirrorless cameras now, and, Canon's making some great cameras, and it's the Coke-Pepsi battle, in my opinion. It's, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you get to know, you just got to know your equipment and you got to know how to use it. This is the camera that I found that I really liked and really fits well in my hands, and I'm just really comfortable with it. And it was a great camera for the price, and it lets me do everything I wanted to do when it comes to storm capturing and everything else that I want to do with a camera. The manual settings were honestly one of the biggest reasons that I moved into a DSLR. I liked my bridge camera. It was a handy little camera, but it was limiting me on what I wanted to do as far as being a photographer. You don't have to have a DSLR camera to capture storms and lightning and stuff, but it does help because the manual settings here are what's really important in order to capture that. And I'm going to be honest, I've captured some pretty great shots with my phone too. So, it's always, the best camera you have is the one that you have with you. That's true to a point. Obviously, the better the camera you have, the better chances of you're going to get a better shot. Don't be discouraged if all you have is a phone. These tips are going to be more for somebody who maybe has a DSLR or who knows more about their manual settings in their current camera. Get familiar with the camera you're using. That's probably the biggest thing I can tell you is just really be familiar with the camera you're using and really be familiar with the manual settings. I'm on a budget, so when I picked a lens, I wanted to pick a lens that I was going to get a lot of use out of. And I went with the Tamron 18mm to 400mm 3.5 lens. I picked this lens up for a number of reasons. One, it's a really sharp lens. It's a really good sharp lens, and I'm getting some really, really great images from it. I know there are faster lenses out there. There are bigger lenses out there. There are better lenses out there, but for the price range that I was in, this lens does everything I want. And it's a lens that I hardly ever take off. It's the perfect walk-around lens if you're a traveler because you've got the great wide-angle range of the 18mm, but yet you've got the capability of zooming in to 400 to capture that close-up shot that you want. I found that this lens is just a great walk-around lens. It's a great price on this lens. And I like this lens for storm photography because it allows me to choose the areas I want to choose. If I want to go wide in an area, I can go wide. If I want to kind of focus in on a little area where I maybe noticed a little bit more activity, I can do that, and I can do it quickly without having to change lenses, because the more times you change a lens, there's more chances you're going to get dust and dirt on your sensor. So I found that this lens for me is a great lens. Now, there are better lenses. I know there are better lenses out there for shooting photography, but again, this one was one that I have, and this is the one that I'm going to talk about today. The only problem I have with this lens is that the focus is really, really touchy. It's really fine adjustments when you get into landscape photography. It's a very touchy lens when shooting at night, and sometimes it's kind of a challenge to know if you're in focus, especially at night. It doesn't have good focus markers on the lens, so you're kind of sometimes guessing if you're in focus or not. So that's really the only problem I have with that lens. But I've learned to deal with it, and it's worth dealing with because, again, it's a very sharp lens. It's a great lens. So if you're looking for a good walk-around lens that you can pretty much do anything and everything you want to do with it, I would highly recommend this lens. Now, the other piece of equipment that I really count on during storm photography is my myop camera trigger. It has a lightning setting on it that's so valuable to me when shooting storms. It uses like a little sensor in the front, and it detects lightning and remotely activates the shutter. It's nice because then I don't have to have my finger on the camera. It's not perfect, but it takes a lot of the guesswork out of when to push that shutter button. I'm not saying you can't do it manually, or with maybe if you've got a little remote, like my camera comes with a little handheld remote that I can remotely activate the shutter. I've done it like that. In fact, there's sometimes I still do it like that, but for the most part, these lightning triggers are pretty amazing and pretty accurate. Now, I have found that when the storm is farther out, that the trigger has a problem determining what's lightning. Sometimes it'll just keep going off if there's a lot of lightning in the air, but it's not like streak lightning. So there are some flaws with it, but when that storm is right close to you and you're getting some really nice lightning shots, it's pretty bang accurate, and I'm very happy with it. It was one of those things that I kind of broke down and didn't necessarily need, but I'm glad I've got it, and I would highly suggest looking into the Myops camera trigger for your camera. I also have a few other little cameras that I set up other than my main camera. I like to use GoPros. I like the time-lapse setting of a GoPro. And depending on the time of day, I might use video. The GoPros, some of them struggle as soon as it gets dark out. So I find that they do work better with the time lapse. I do have a little video camera too, sometimes a little handheld camcorder that I'll take with me, and I'll set that up just to let that roll as well. So I do have a few other things, but I like the GoPros because you got the waterproof housings, and sometimes I'll just set them up and leave them alone. And you get these really cool images of the storm front coming through, the hard rain coming and raining on the camera, and you don't have to worry about it. You know, the waterproof housings are really great for those cameras, just to leave them out there, let them record the storm, and just let them go. And sometimes when I'm home, I'll set one on the west side of the house, one on the east side of the house, and if you've seen some of my videos, you see where the storm comes and goes, and it's really kind of a neat effect if you can get it to work like that. But if you've got a few smaller action cameras that you can set up that are waterproof, these are great just to give you kind of some little extra stuff. And I always feel like, if I don't capture anything with my DSLR, that at least I've got the GoPro getting something for me. So every storm chasing adventure, there's not a loss in anything because at least my GoPros are getting something. I've got my main DSLR camera. I've got a good lens. I've got my Myops trigger and some GoPros. And I've got a few other small things. I've got a sturdy tripod. Obviously, that's very important. Make sure you've got a good, sturdy, heavy tripod. You're going to be dealing with winds, and you don't want a flimsy tripod being blown over in the wind and destroying your camera. I keep lens cloths because obviously you're going to get some rain, so you want to keep them lenses clean. You want some rain gear for yourself, for the camera. And I just try to keep my setup simple. That's the biggest thing. Keep your setup simple. Keep your equipment list simple. Because you got to be able to move. You got to be able to get out of the way or move to a different location, and you don't want to have to pack up a lot of things. So make sure that you're packing yourself light and you're keeping yourself very mobile because your situation, you need to be mobile. Your next step now is to do some research. The first thing you're going to do, obviously, is you're going to watch the weather. You're going to watch your local weather forecasts. You're going to kind of plan ahead. for the most part, they're pretty accurate on when we're going to get rain and when we're going to get some storms. So you can kind of see that 3 days out already. So if you know that you're going to be heading out, kind of start paying attention to where they're forecasting those storms are going to be and start planning. Start planning the areas that you want to go into as you see these forecast maps develop. For me, I'm pretty fortunate. I live in central Wisconsin, and there's a lot of pretty decent storms that roll through my area, and I don't have to travel very far, if at all. I mean, I'm very fortunate where I live that I've gotten some spectacular shots just right off my front porch. So I don't do a lot of traveling around, and when you do, you just got to make sure you know where you are. Know the area you're going in, do some research, and just know how the storms are going to move through the area so that maybe you can find those vantage points where you're going to get some really, really good shots. So look for places that are going to give you good depth of field and good distance and maybe see the storm develop. You know, that to me is always important when you're doing storm photography. You want to see that storm develop. You want to see it coming at you or going alongside of you. It's you want to be able to keep track of how things are unfolding as they are. But know the area you're going in and do the best you can to at least have an idea of where you're going and what you're doing. Know where you can find shelters. That's always the biggest thing. If you're going into someplace new, know a good place that you're going to be able to get out of it, whether that's going to be a gas station if you got to pull in there and go in for a little bit as the storm passes. The biggest thing is be safe. And to me, this is where your smartphones come in, because a good weather app on your smartphone can really come in handy as far as monitoring the storm and how it's moving. I don't have any big radar equipment or any big equipment that's going to tell me how a storm is moving, so I rely on my smartphone. I rely on the AccuWeather app, and it's on my Android phone, and it gives me pretty decent, accurate times when the storm's going to get there, and gives me a good radar that I can follow and see how the storm is moving. And I found that the AccuWeather app is actually pretty good. Now, there are a lot of other apps out there. There are a lot of TV stations that put out apps, and those are all very good as well. So find one that you like, find one that you can trust, and just learn all of its features. Know how to use it inside and out. Know how to read the radar. The more you keep yourself informed during these storms, the safer you're going to be. Besides that, it's going to allow you to kind of get a feel of how it's moving and where to put yourself so that you might be able to get a chance to get a great shot. So before you head out, pay attention to that forecast. Have your phone charged. Make sure your phone is charged up and ready to go. And just look at those apps and check out those apps and be mindful of how the fronts are moving and watch the radar so that you can kind of predict where the storm is heading and where it's going. Now, the next one is one that I get asked a lot. What are your camera settings? You've got all the equipment, you know where you're going, now you're ready to set up, and you're just not sure what to do next. That's a position I think all photographers have been in at least once in their lives. It's how do I set the camera up so that I can get it? The first thing I can say is you're going to be shooting in manual mode. That is going to be the best thing you can do. So before you even head out, before the skies even start to darken, be familiar with your camera's manual mode. Take a lot of pictures, try a lot of different things, adjust those settings and see how it changes your camera. Really be familiar with how manual mode works and how your camera reacts to different settings, because you're going to want to make adjustments, and sometimes those adjustments are going to have to be quick. So you're going to want to be able to make those adjustments and make good decisions. And the other thing is sometimes you're going to be working and it's going to be dark. Them storms last week, it was Saturday morning and you would have thought it was night out, as dark as those clouds were and as dark as it was outside. Really be familiar with your camera and its settings, because that's going to be very important for you to understand how to make those adjustments on the fly. There are a couple ways you can approach camera settings. The first is to experiment, and I think we've all probably been on this end a little bit. You can just play around with settings and find one that works and see what's going on. But the other way is to see what others are doing and tweak from there. And I think a lot of us have done that now, especially since it's pretty easy to go on YouTube and look up what other people are doing, join photography groups and on Facebook, and you can ask people what their settings are too. And everybody's pretty much willing to help you because everybody wants great pictures. Everybody wants to share great pictures. So why not help each other? I'm going to give you a few of the settings that I use, and sometimes you just got to adjust from there. The first one is focus. I always use manual focus. I try to keep the focus on the infinity setting, which gives you the greatest focus throughout your whole field. I try to stay away from autofocus. I find sometimes that it's glitchy and doesn't know what to focus on. Even if I focus it on a certain point, sometimes that's off too. So my results have been kind of hit and miss when I've used autofocus. I've always stuck with manual focus, and once you get it set, you're pretty much ready to go. One of the things about the Tamron lens I've found out is that's one thing I miss is those focus marks. So you kind of gotta adjust a little bit on that one, but a lot of lenses have the infinity setting. You can set it on there and you're good to go and just leave it alone. On my lens, I turn off the anti-vibration setting. For some reason, this setting has a tough time dealing with storms and maybe the camera trigger. And about every third or fourth shot I get from it is just a little bit out of focus, like the camera shakes a little bit. So I found if I turn that off, I don't have that problem. I don't know why. It's just maybe just the characteristics of the lens. So your lens might be different. Your lens might be able to handle that all right. And you should be on a tripod anyway. So if you're on a tripod, you really don't need that anyway. Those are more for handheld and, those fast shots that you're going to be swinging around and doing a lot of stuff. I suggest turning it off and trying it. If you need it turned on, leave it turned on. But the lens that I have, again, I'm familiar with my lens, so I know that I have to turn that off when I'm doing this kind of photography. The aperture is probably one of the most important things you're going to do when you're shooting. It not only tells the camera how much light to let in, but it's also super important when it comes to focus. Now, aperture numbers can be kind of confusing. So the higher the aperture number, like f8 through f11, means greater depth of field and more of the background will be focused. When you start getting into the f2s and f5s, a lot of times your background is out of focus because you're losing depth of field. Stay into that higher number if you can. I usually stick between f8 and f11. I adjust usually accordingly. I find that it's been a pretty good setting for lightning, and it keeps my images sharp. The backgrounds are always sharp, and it can handle most of the bright flashes. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes you'll get that really bright lightning shot, and it just washes everything out, and there's really nothing you can do. I mean, when Mother Nature is putting that much power on display, it's hard to control that by adjusting settings. So I found usually between f8 and f11 are really good settings for most lightning shots. So after you've got that set, your next setting is going to be your shutter speed. Now this is one that probably varies the most, and everybody does this a little bit different. I've shot shutter speeds of 2 seconds all the way up to 15 seconds. It all really depends on the type of storm and the amount of lightning. You have to remember the longer the shutter stays open, the more light's coming in and the higher chance of overexposure. So if you're grabbing far away lightning, sometimes that helps a little bit if you've got a little longer shutter, or if there's a lot of lightning happening but it's farther away, a longer shutter speed sometimes help. I found that with, my aperture set about f8, I usually start at about 1.5 second shutter and I adjust from there. I found that most lightning, you get that first flash, and then there's just a little bit of almost like trail off, or a little bit of residue, lightning residue, let's call it, after that initial flash. And that's where you really get those really cool streaks across the sky. So you got to leave that shutter open just a little bit longer than if it was just a quick flash. So I always start with at about 1.5 seconds. And sometimes I'll go up to 2, sometimes 3, but at that time, then I'm also adjusting my aperture a little bit too. So be mindful of that, but always give yourself at least 1 second or 1.5 seconds to start out with when you're doing it. Now again, this usually is at night too. So if I'm during the day, you might have to increase your aperture so you're not letting as much light in and still be able to have that long of a shutter speed. The ISO level, that one, the general rule of thumb with your ISO level is to keep it as low as you can go. The lower the level, the more clear your images will be, and you won't get that grainy look. When you start getting into the higher ISO levels, 1000, 1200, 1600, you might start to notice a little noise or a little graininess in your images. Now, each camera again here is different. The cameras today, they handle ISO so well, and you can have such high ISOs and they're still tack sharp images. You just kind of have to adjust accordingly to that. And my rule of thumb is always just to try to keep it low. I try to keep mine at least around 600 or lower if possible. So those are just a few of the settings I use. It's pretty simple. Again, use manual mode because you're telling the camera exactly what to do in that situation. Stay away from the autos and stay away from all that because you're just not going to be happy with the results of that. I suggest keep it in manual and learn your manual modes and start with those settings and just kind of adjust from there. It's kind of the fun of photography, in my opinion, is figuring out them settings and adjusting those settings so that you're able to capture the images that you want. Now you're ready to start to capture. I'm going to tell you right now, honestly, that capturing that great lightning shot is a lot of luck. It's a little skill, but it's a lot of luck. It's got to be, in my opinion, 90% luck. You have to have that camera pointed in the right direction and have your settings set at the right settings in order to get that shot. And even then, you still might not get that shot. I can't tell you how many times I've had my camera pointed in one direction because for a while I noticed some lightning over there. And as soon as I get it set up, the lightning goes away and the position of lightning is moved in a completely different direction. So you move your camera over there to capture it and it goes back to where you were. So it's a lot of luck. It's a lot of patience. But to me, that's what's fun about shooting storms and trying to capture lightning. It's a lot of fun. It is a challenge because it is kind of a game of luck. Honestly, there's just nothing more satisfying when you do get that shot. I've stood outside and grabbed the shot and looked at it. I was so excited to grab that one shot. And maybe that's the only shot I got in an hour of being out there. Take your time, have fun, and be patient. Don't be afraid to adjust your shot and move it around a little bit. But give it some time. You know, they say it never strikes the same place twice, but there's just nothing more satisfying than when you get that one shot that you look at it and go, yeah, this is awesome. So my last tip is my most important tip. It's be safe. Don't put yourself in harm's way for a shot. It's just not worth it. Always be aware of what's going on around you. Always pay attention to how the storm is moving, and have a plan to keep yourself safe. If you can shoot from your deck or your porch, do it. If you can shoot it from a car, do it. If you can be inside of a shed, do it. Don't put yourself out there in harm's way. Don't take chances. Storms are very unpredictable. We know this. We know that they're unpredictable. You're not going to do something and outsmart a storm or think you're going to outsmart a storm because that's when it'll come around and get you. So don't put yourself in a bad situation. Know your surroundings. Know where you're going to go. Have a plan. Be ready to move quickly and to move to a safe place. If you have a camera trigger and you can walk away and leave the camera outside while you're inside, do that. I've done that multiple times. I've set my camera up outside and come back into the house. I pay attention. I make sure that it's not going to tip over or that I've got the right rain gear on it. Any chance you get to be absolutely safe and absolutely sure you're going to be safe, do that. Don't put yourself out there. I don't want anybody getting hurt doing this because it's not worth it. That shot is not worth you risking your life over. So please be safe, be smart, and have fun. Shooting storms can be very challenging and very rewarding. Be prepared and enjoy the show that Mother Nature is putting on for you as one of Wisconsin's outdoor explorers. Thanks again for joining me for this week's podcast. I am your host, Jason, and I will talk to you again next week. Thanks for listening to the Wisconsin's Outdoor Explorer podcast. For more great information about being an outdoor explorer, visit our website at wisconsinsoutdoorexplorer.com. Be sure to check out the blog page and follow us on social media. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.